the instructional intervention that we were using with the student. We amended the IEP and added additional pull-out time, or we added push-in time. Whatever it might be, you're gonna document all those changes on your progress report. So insufficient progress doesn't come as a surprise to anyone, and it's not something like you're sitting at home at night filling out your progress report and you're like, insufficient progress. Like, this is one that you see coming along the way. Does that make sense? So please do not feel that we never have goals that are marked as insufficient progress, because we do. But the caveat to that is we're documenting the changes in the problem solving we're doing around that. If from that quarter we haven't gotten on a good track with that kiddo, we wouldn't have to, well, I mean, we could, but really if you're on track the next progress monitoring period to still be going the same path, you probably need to be meeting back as a full IEP team and having discussion about whether that goal needs to be changed, whether there were prerequisite skills that needed to be taught prior to the student being ready for what that goal encompassed, or breaking it down into smaller pieces, or whether really the need that was captured by that goal is no longer the same need. So those are kind of those pieces to that. Sound good? Okay. And then tonight, we are gonna go through each of those areas of the functional behavior assessment form with information about what kind of content goes into each of those areas. So I think that will help you guys as your groups have the information you need kind of seeing that assignment through, but also for you guys with your own individual caseloads, having a good idea, not that the FBA is a document you would be completing on your own, but as you have students and you're reading the content within there, some better understanding to that. But I'm gonna kind of flip where my mind was on stuff, and I want us to talk about the lesson plan assignment first and some resources for that, if that works for you guys. So I'm gonna kind of flip on that a little bit. And that leads me into where my head kind of got on some changes. So from that schedule that I shared with you guys, first class, we need to get more into FBA and those lesson plans tonight. So we're going to, that Gross-Green collaborative problem solving is taking the place of that can't do, won't do assignment. So don't worry as due dates are coming up for that. But we're gonna bump that down to April 20th and talk about Ross-Green stuff that evening. I'm moving graphing data to next week. We'll get into that, and we'll actually, I think, have some time to work within our groups, looking at your data that you've collected to this point and starting to work to get them graphed, so that way I can be here with you guys if you run into hiccups on that, and we can work on them together a little bit. But where things kind of fell for me, and I need feedback from you guys as far as where you feel like you are on that lesson plan assignment. So,
going back a little bit, I have a question about data collection. So the student I picked, I love her so much. But she really threw a wrench in my plan because we've been like testing this. Like I see her and I was like so ready and like, yes, she's so on task. And then like we've been like state testing this week. So like the data I've been collecting does not reflect.
So here's what I'm going to tell you on this. You can fake it.
Okay.
Because this is purely for having the data available for doing the assignment, right? What we're putting together, because you're taking data from 4 to 5 people and putting it all together and pretending like that's one person. So clearly this is not data we're using to make decisions for kids. It's a practice, right? So, like I would still, as just practice, be like collecting the data that you can with her, but if then it skews things and doesn't give you what you need for your assignment as a group, just add some extra to it.
Because I didn't want it to be like, oh, I have no problems, because like, it looks like she's doing what she's supposed to, because she is. But if we weren't testing, then it would be like.
And how do you have that kid, because I think all the rest of us have the offside, or the flip side of that our kids now have weird schedules and they're all flying off the rails.
She's a mystery. She's an enigma. She is.
Bless her heart.
Yes.
Wow. But no, you guys have creative license on this, and that's kind of what we're gonna talk about too, as far as those components tonight with that FBA completing it. You're gonna make up a lot of stuff. Like, you can put what you know from your experiences and things like that, but you have creative license to dramatize whatever you need to. Sound good? Kelly, did you have a question? Okay. So tell me, so that lesson plan assignment, right now, the way that we have it is that your final copy of your lesson plan is due to be turned in on Sunday evening. And then following that, your video of that lesson is complete on the 16th. Bear in mind, and did you guys get that updated information about when I told you, remember when Tom's like, you're just gonna see this, right? And I'm like, yes, me and maybe my kids if they're walking through the room. So that is a change. They're using it as a teaching opportunity for people who are in an admin program to practice doing like keep to observation evaluation pieces. So they're doing your videos as part of their lesson. Yay. Did you guys get your emails about who your person is?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah? All good on that? Sorry about that little shift. But with that, so I sent an email today just asking like, hey, do you really have to have those videos on the 16th? Or can we push it back a week? Because I was thinking if you guys had even an extra week working through your lesson plan and then having the video due on the 23rd, maybe that would help lighten things up a little bit for you guys. Does that make it better or worse?
Much better.
I mean, everybody's always welcome to work ahead. But here's the problem. I have not gotten the okay from Fort Hays to move that because I know then it impacts that other class and their timeline. And I don't know you.
Sorry.
No, you're fine.
I was just wondering, like, are we reflecting just on our own lesson plan and making changes, or will we be receiving feedback from you? Since we've already
So
submitted
if you
that?
have questions on it or want me to look at some piece, you are welcome to reach out to me on that. But I felt like I've graded 2 lesson plans from you guys previously, so you kind of know what I'm looking for on those. And it,
I just haven't.
oh, you just
I
haven't,
wasn't-
that's true. I didn't think about
Sorry.
that, sorry. You are welcome to send it to me to look at. Yeah.
Do you want me to email it to you? That's
Sure,
easier.
that's great. But guys, but don't feel like you can't reach out with questions on things or say, like, email it to me and be like, hey Linda, look at this and see what you think. I'm just not gonna fully grade it, give it back to you, then fully grade it again, if that makes sense. But I will say, and I think everybody here would kind of agree with this, like really the piece that I look for is that instruction part. That summary of what you are teaching. Like this is the part where the art form of being a teacher comes into place. So not just like turn to page 9 and answer questions 1 through 5 and then I'll tell you whether you're right or wrong. Like that's not our instruction piece. That would be a practice piece to go in there. This is your, hey, we're having this discussion. I'm sharing this new content with you. I'm introducing this lesson to you. And here's the structure of what that looks like. Here's different scenarios that I'm giving you that we're problem solving or we're doing role playing. And here's the scenario I gave to different groups and they're going to act these out. We're going to talk about what's expected and unexpected behavior. And so we're going to use an expected and unexpected map and we're going to start plugging in different situations into that. And so outlining all those details there. It does not have to be a 10-page litany of every single word that you're gonna utter, but it does need to have, like, from it, think about it as a sub-plan, that me as a substitute could come in and teach that lesson, or a paraeducator could pick up that lesson and teach it with pretty close to fidelity of how you would teach it. Sound good? Okay. And I brought for you guys, I don't know what you all have access to at your buildings. I know different buildings have different stuff and different programs going on. I brought some of my favorites that I have used and gone to, and you guys are welcome. I'm sticking a piece of paper over here, so if anybody wants to like take one of these with them and use it and bring it back, you are more than welcome to them. This one is more, it says K through 8, but I would say when we have our struggling SEL kiddos, really early high school definitely is captured within this as well. But it has some lesson planning pieces for how you can approach and take SEL instruction. There's some really good visuals within it also. Teaching self-regulation is a good one. People lean to zones of regulation. Just so you know, we talk a lot about what curriculum are you using, and people will say zones of regulation. Zones of regulation is not a research-based vetted curriculum. It's a research-based intervention. So we teach the skills for students to access zones of regulation, but like when you look at this, it's not like, okay, here's lesson 1, here's lesson 2, here's lesson 3, here's what you do. It has all different resources within it. It has some good lessons within it that you can pick and choose from for what a kiddo needs. But like not every kid is gonna need to do figure 8 breathing. Not every kid is using zones of regulation based on anxiety. It can be other big behaviors too, right? So it does have some good ideas and pieces on it, but it's definitely not a systematic lesson 1, lesson 2, lesson 3, here we are type piece. The biggest piece to say, like, people would be like, oh, we're working on zones, we're identifying where we are on the scale, and we really never take it further than that. Like, we talk a lot about what zone are you in, and we say green and blue and those pieces, or I say, it looks like you're getting yellow, what can we do? The biggest piece to zones of regulation is that toolbox piece of when I am at a blue and super hyper excited, or when I am red and I am raging angry maybe, what are the tools I can rely on to help myself work back to green? So making sure to individualize that piece on that one. Yep.
So the thing that I struggle with is because I work with sophomores and juniors who are really lacking those social emotional skills. So much of the stuff that I come across is like for younger kids. So they look at it and they're like, I'm not a
And it looks
baby. I'm not doing that. So do you have something that's more appropriate for that age group?
Look at Tony Atwood's stuff.
Atwood?
I don't have it with me.
Okay.
But there's some good online resources for that have some lower skill set for SEL presented in a more age appropriate.
That's exactly what I need. Yeah.
Tony
Okay.
Atwood is your friend.
Tony, Tony.
T-O-N-Y.
Okay.
That's right.
It looks like Zone updated all of their like graphics to those, so they do look a little bit more mature.
Oh,
And
okay.
if you dig into the zones, resource, they also have things like size of the problem or different things like that I use with older kids that are sometimes beneficial. So
Okay.
give that a try also.
Cool. Yeah, I haven't looked at it in a minute, so it's always been younger, but
So on your lesson, remember we talked about first night, it can be the student who you're looking at for your FBA and your BIP, but it does not have to be. You are taking a skill that needs to be taught, right? That lesson to be taught. So thinking down to, gosh, we need to work on turn taking. We need to work on sitting and attending. We need to work on asking a peer to play. We need to work on a peer saying, no, I don't want to play with you, and how we respond to that. We need to work on when my teacher gives me a direction, that I can comply with it. Or being able to sustain in the classroom, being regulated, that I don't walk out. So maybe I'm teaching a student to use a hot pass to go to a specific location, and we're practicing those skills. That's what your lesson plan should be capturing. But remember, those skills are gonna take a lot of lessons to capture. This lesson is a 10 to 15 minute max, like mini lesson time. So you're not getting deep into the weeds in that content area. So think about a little introduction. Here's the new information I'm gonna give you, and here's how we're going to practice that. Okay? As you guys are working on your FBAs and BIPs, this one has some good examples and some good verbiage, especially if you're struggling with like how to define your behavior, those pieces. I brought this as a resource for you guys. This book is magic gold, and there are several different versions of it. This one's actually a smaller version. I have one that's probably like 3 times the size of this. If you turn to any sort of thing that you're struggling with, has little or no interactions with the teacher, there are 42 different interventions you can try for that in here. If your issue has little or no interactions with peers, there's 42 more intervention ideas. Makes inappropriate comments to other students. Here are 38 things you can do. So as you're talking about on your FBA and your BIP, if you're struggling for what interventions maybe to try, this resource can be helpful. Response inappropriately to typical physical exchanges with other students. So like a high five, they maybe don't respond well to that. There's 21 different ones. If you also look at very similar to this, so if somebody else is grabbing that, if you look back, I linked it on last week's stuff, the Shawnee Mission, that behavior resource document. If you look here for behavior wise, if you click on any of these, so like if you have an issue with aggressive behavior and you click to that file, here are a variety of different behaviors that you might see, so verbally or physically threatens other students. So there are the interventions there for, oops, it's gonna jump to fighting with students.
Is that the book you just read?
So this is actually from a different version of that one. But so there are 43, that seems to be a magic number, doesn't it? Different intervention ideas there. So these resources are there for you for this class, but also long-term. The idea there is that teens are problem solving, maybe at tier 1, tier 2 with ideas through SIT team. That could be a resource to them, but it's also there for you guys as well as you're planning for kiddos. Sound good? And that is linked, so the slides that I just shared with you right before class today, I'm just putting all of our slides in one link. So like next week, I'll add next week's content to it so you always have it to come back to. And this one was linked from last week's information on that very first slide. So that link will take you there. It's also on the Special Ed Hub. The link to it is there as well as a resource. Sound good? Some people had asked about the different data sheets that were shown on the slides from last week about having versions of those. I think all or almost all of them are linked within this document as well. So those links should take you, and like as we talked this week about some observations, there's an observation template in there. ABC, data collection tool. So there's a variety of them, of options within here too. If there's one specifically that you're looking for that you're not finding on there, just let me know. I'm happy to send you guys stuff because I have like 40 million different versions of a variety of different things. Sound good?
What was the previous slide you were just on? What number was it?
Which
3?
one?
Oh, she told me, sorry.
Oh,
Thanks.
with behavior resource center.
No.
All right. Any questions on that? So, assuming I don't hear no from Fort Hayes, do you want me to go in? Well, here's the deal. I'm gonna go in and change the due dates on the lesson plan and the video. Anything that's on there, you can always submit ahead of time. So if you wanna stay on the schedule how it's mapped out, 100% you can. If you feel like you need more time on that lesson plan and the video, then you have that extra time within there. The only piece would be if I hear back from Fort Hayes and Brooke says, no, thank you, don't do that, then I will let you guys know. But with that, I'm also fine if you turn in your lesson plan and your video next week, both. That's totally fine with me too. So it's just whether you need to have it on the 16th or the 23rd, and I'll get back to you guys on that. Sound good? Okay. Tonight, I wanna get into the FBA piece. Coming up, it breaks up in, the way Fort Hayes maps it out, breaks up your FBA into multiple components to be turned in at different times. I am fine with you guys pacing differently from how it's outlined on there. This is just an idea to kind of like, hey, we should kind of be at this point now, we should kind of be here, we should kind of be here, going through it. But don't feel like you have to be tied to those. The main thing is just getting that final one submitted at the right date. Sound good on that? So for next week, there's another discussion board that's due. And then technically the lesson plan, but we're saying the lesson plan by the 16th, so that's up to you guys. And then your first reflection, so that's those, practicum logs, essentially. So that's that reflect, what?
Those 4 questions.
Uh-huh. And think of it like a paragraph per question. And so maybe like a page and a half to 2 total. Don't worry about APA style. Just please don't do like 10-point font and single space, please. But yeah, if you're going well beyond 2 to 2.5 pages, like it's fine for you to go back and summarize more and less detail. Sound good? All right. Questions on things that are coming up? Good? Okay. Let's dive into the FBA. So, a piece I want to put out there for you guys is an FBA, similar to any student evaluation, an FBA is never a single person completed item. It is a team collaboration, always. So when people talk about, well, who's responsible for it? Is it the psych? Is it the behavior support teacher? Is it the case manager? The answer is D, all of the above. So all of those parties should be contributing to the FBA and that information being gathered. In Shawnee Mission, it is typical practice that our behavior support teacher, or this year because behavior support teacher issues, well, not their issues, but staffing issues and their time being elsewhere, our psychs have taken more of a lead with our FBAs than what they typically would. They tend to be like lead the team on completing the FBA. But they very much are gonna be coming to you all as case managers for different components to the FBA to be completed, especially the day-to-day data collection piece. They might be asking you to do some observations, some rating scale pieces. But when it comes to the synthesizing of that data and bringing it all together and making interpretations of it, your psych and your BST are gonna take the lead on that. So this assignment, you're being asked to do those things, but know that in practice, in your role in Shawnee Mission, that is not something you're gonna be asked to take the lead on. okay? But licensure wise, and you move to another district, that very much might not be the case. So there's other areas, even around here, where that isn't the case, where the case manager does the FBA all on their own. We just happen to structure it differently. So you do need to have awareness of it, of how to do it. Not that you're allowed to go anywhere else, but if something weird happened at some point and you made that bad decision, you might have to. So you shouldn't go somewhere else, because then you'll have to do your own FBAs.
I mean, that's what I'm hearing.
Does that sound good?
Yeah.
Right up your point for you as well. Okay. So,
Right, Carla?
yeah, no pressure, but there is. So what I have put together, and there's some things that are a repeat of last week that I just wanna make sure we hit on again a little bit, but I just wanna go through, so the Shawnee Mission FBA form, and you guys are welcome as a team too, to have that FBA document that you're working from open and be making notes in there as we go, or on your own about kind of what content is gonna go into each of those areas on your document. So, we start out as a team, and the first step, so let me back up. An FBA, I'm gonna back it up. I linked on here the Shawnee Mission guidance practice for FBAs. So on here, if you have a question of when you need to go to an FBA and what the steps are, they're all right in here for you. So if you have a student who has behavior that is outside of what you have observed with them or evaluated them for previously, and you need to dig deeper on it, you need to go to evaluation to complete an FBA. So you cannot complete any of these components outside of consent for evaluation. So we see a kiddo is struggling, they've maybe had behavior struggles in the past, but this is something new and different, they're now eloping outside of the building. We contact the parent, our psych, and us, and the team has a proposal that we would like to do an FBA. Your school psych is gonna issue consent to evaluate, and on that consent, they're gonna mark a box that says social emotional. And when on the eval form, when it talks about social emotional, it lists as one item that may be done within that area is a functional behavior assessment. So consent in that area of social emotional gives you the ability as a team to do an FBA. So once you have consent for that, okay, as a team, you're gonna come back together, and your first step with consent from the parent is going to be the definition of your target behavior. So you sit down and make sure as a team, we all have common understanding of the behavior being targeted. We kind of hit on this before. So you're gonna talk about elopement and what is defined as elopement, that the student has left the classroom setting without permission and following a prompt to return to the classroom has continued to flee and is not responsive to staff redirections back to a safe setting. So you're gonna define that out. Sometimes we have kids, it might come as a shock to you, who show more than one behavior at a time. And so maybe we want to evaluate more than one at a time, and that is okay, but it gets really sticky, and you guys will see as you're collecting that antecedent behavior consequence data, if you have too many behaviors, you can't sort them out from each other. So you have to prioritize. And I tell my teams, you can do 2, and I can be comfortable with that. If you hit 3 behaviors on an FBA, I get clammy. Like anything more than 3 is just not good practice. So 1 and 2 are very, very good, and you can have a good, clean FBA. You hit 3, you're starting to kind of walk the line, but I can live with it, but nothing beyond that. So talk to your team, because you might have 5 behaviors that you're talking about that are impactful to your kiddo. You find the ones that are most impactful to the student accessing their learning, and that's what you start with. That doesn't mean the others we're just ignoring. We're still gonna plan for and support the student with those, But when it comes to evaluation and finding our hypothesis, we're starting with those, okay? So you're going to define it, and then the assessment methods used and the historical analysis, those are parts that are gonna come from your evaluation report and are really ones that you're gonna come back to later, because you're gonna go through and do your evaluation, and then you're gonna come back to that assessment methods used for your FBA there, and you're gonna add that in later. So you're gonna be like, oh, I did a QABF, and we did antecedent behavior consequence data, and we did interviews, and you're gonna list all those tools that you used there. Your historical analysis is very similar to what your school psych is going to write in the student history section of your evaluation report. So this is the piece of, Johnny has been a student in Shawnee Mission School District for the past 7 years. The family has moved 3 times. He has no outside medical diagnoses, blah, blah, like it's all those pieces. Like, what have grades looked like? What does their discipline record look like? What does their attendance record look like? Because you definitely, those are pieces that you want to look at. How many times has the student been suspended? And what were they suspended for? That summary all goes in there. It's all your background information that lead up to the evaluation period. Okay? And oftentimes, and there's several components to the FBA that end up becoming repeated information from the evaluation report. And there's a reason for that, because we want our FBA to be a standalone document that we can pick up and use that has that information on it without having to sort back through the full evaluation report as well. Because sometimes we'll go back and we'll amend the FBA. We never amend an evaluation report, but there are times where we might need to amend our FBA. So there is repeat information on there. So determining the number of behaviors, thinking about the safety element, right? The frequency of the behavior occurring and the gravity, how severe is the behavior that's occurring. And those are factors you want to take into account when you're deciding which ones to target. You're writing that operational definition of your behavior, so everybody, no matter who comes in to observe that student, views it in exactly the same way. And then assessment method, so that third piece that was just on that chunk. We talk a lot about, and here's the thing, when I put this together, and we were doing this with some of the behavior support teachers and some of the school psychs, I had always been taught that a triangle is the strongest shape, but then I Googled it and it really isn't. It's some other different random obscure shape. But we're gonna pretend like a triangle is the strongest shape, okay? Good solid base, right? Strong support, it doesn't tip over. So the same as a triangle, 3 sides, think about that. We need to triangulate our data. So we are going to not do an FBA and have our data be a one and done. So when we look at it, we look for trends to our antecedent behavior consequence and our hypothesized function data. We start collecting that and graphing that. We also maybe do some observations to see, hey, what I came in and observed, does it match to what that data that's being collected is showing us? Yes, it does. Oh, that's good. We're gonna also do some rating scales, and we'll talk about some different options for rating scales that you can use. Does the results from those rating scales match to our data that's collected and match to our observation results? If all 3 are in line, I mean, the like clouds part and there's a rainbow that shines through. Like that's the magic piece when all 3 forms match. The reason we need to do this, where like maybe a school psych only does 1 IQ test, right? And we take that result for what it is. That is not a subjective test, right? An IQ test is that formal assessment where you get that result and it's really not up for much interpretation or question. On this, we're asking for a lot of opinion and interpretation for an FBA of finding out what the function of a behavior is. So we wanna make sure we have multiple means so they match up, that our data doesn't tell us that the hypothesized function is escape. A rating scale says it's attention seeking, but from my observation, I really think that student is sensory seeking, right? Then we know we haven't landed in the right place. There's too much, just opinion to it to leave it at one. So that's why you need to have those multiple means there. When you start to find that they contradict, so maybe your ABC data and your observation match, but your rating scale that you did doesn't match. You look to see how close it aligns. Like maybe your rating scale identifies that the first function of behavior is escape and the second one is attention seeking. Oh, that attention seeking is secondary and it's a pretty close score to that, or they have a really high number in that area. So really it's okay. We can go ahead and use that still. Or if it's completely off, then we need to pull and do a fourth measure so that we have the three that align. Does that make sense? So all those measures that you're using, all those different tools that you're using to assess the function of the behavior get listed out in that box at the top of the FBA form. Okay. There is, and I'm gonna tell you, this part is a struggle bus, and it is a struggle for me, it's a struggle for our behavior support teachers, it's a struggle for our school psychs. There are 3 different areas that become very difficult to sort through what goes where. Your FBA report has your historical analysis, it has your review of record, and it has your previous interventions. Really, it seems like all of those could be captured under your historical analysis. Truly, right? But it breaks it into those 3. So let's talk a little bit about the difference on those pieces. Your review of record maybe is going to include past pieces of, I went through their CUME file and their past educational history and documents from their last school district, and what did you find from that? It's gonna be that sort of summary, more of just the paper review, if you will. Your historical analysis is taking into account like the medical pieces, the attendance pieces, which really could be in record review. Nothing's gonna be wrong if they land in the wrong box, but yeah, it doesn't work out clean. And then previous interventions. So when we think about doing an FBA for a student, think about going through the SIT process, right? So this is something new for this student. What things have we put in place for them along the way as we saw this behavior building with them? And on there, not just a list of the intervention, but specifics, like what date was that intervention put in place? What was the intervention and the setting where it was put in place? And then what was the response to that? So what did the data show us from that? So maybe behavior escalated from that. So we stopped that intervention on such and such date. And then on the next date, we put this in place and replaced it with the other. So it's that track of the intervention that you've tried related to the behaviors that you're evaluating. So on here, you're not gonna put in that we gave them access to a calculator. That's not the type of intervention that we're looking for here. These are related to the behaviors that we're assessing. Questions? Okay. So the next chunk on there is the summary from interviews and review. So listing any health and medical diagnoses. Sometimes, especially we see it a lot like ADHD, if we don't have a paper document from a medical professional that says ADHD, but that like, we're like, yeah, that's a thing. And the parent is like, yeah, that's a thing. You can put things on there that are per parent report. So you can say parent report of ADHD, but then from such and such medical evaluation dated blah, 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 they have explosive disorder, explosive dysregulation disorder, or they have anxiety disorder and those pieces. So make sure you note on there the date of the report that you pull those medical diagnoses from, okay? And then educational and school, so this is coming from your parent interview too. So this, technically that review for the health and medical, you're asking the parent for updates on those, but you can also use the records that you have on hand, which oftentimes come from your evaluation report. Education and school. This is a piece where, so when we're talking about an interview with the parent, we're calling the parent up and chatting with them. We're meeting with them in person to have conversation about, hey, how do you feel your child's education in school is going? And you're gonna reflect the parent input in that second box there. And then you're gonna break it out as far as their social emotional concerns or what they're seeing at home. Yes, ma'am.
Did you say this was part of the historical, or is this
No,
its own section?
sorry, this is its own section. So we're hitting into the interviews section.
Okay.
And it does say report record review. That's because for that first part, you might be looking at medical records that you've collected for that summary there. There are on that Shawnee mission document, there are some different interview tools that you can use, some questionnaires that can lead those discussions. So input from the parent goes in that first section. You're gonna do an interview with the student to find out from them what they're thinking, what they're feeling. If you do a reinforcement inventory, which I would recommend that you do, because you need to know, like, as far as intervention goes, like what keeps them going, what reinforces them. That would go in that student interview section as well. A teacher interview, and then if there's any other record pieces that you want to reflect in there, you can as well. Yep.
The one you were saying is on the resource, is that the functional assessment interview for parent or guardian?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Or wait, say that again?
You said that it was on the resource, is that the functional assessment interview for parent or
There's a couple
guardian?
different ones that are linked on there that you can use.
So under questionnaires here?
Uh-huh, yep,
Okay.
the parent and student one. The teacher one doesn't have a link to it, does it? There's different ones that we can get to, you guys. For your assignment, this is likely going to be made up information, okay? You're gonna like use your creative writing skills here to reflect that information. Please don't think that you need to call that parent. I mean, it would be good because you identified that student for a reason, so maybe you need to have some dialogue with them. But don't feel like you're doing a formal interview time with them for this assignment, okay? Same thing with teachers and that piece. I will tell you, sometimes people in practice think like, let's work smarter, not harder. And for their interviews, they just send home a little questionnaire and let the parents answer it and send it back, and then it's done. That is like we didn't have any other option for getting information from the parents, so this is how we did it option. Really, when you are talking about students who have behavior that is so significant that you're evaluating it through an FBA, you need to sit down with the parent and have conversation with them, because you need to be able to ask follow-up questions to what they're telling you. So they start talking about, oh my gosh, yeah, you know, at preschool we got kicked out. Really? Tell me more about that. What did that look like? Well, gosh, they didn't get kicked out of kindergarten or first grade, so what was different then? What was going on then? Tell me about this. Oh, really? Mom struggled at school also and had some behavior pieces too. Do you mind sharing more about that? And so you need to have that dialogue with them that only comes from whether you're doing it by WebEx or the phone, or ideally sitting down in person to just have a conversation with them. And know that for any parent, sharing this kind of information is super personal, and they know their kid is not showing their best. And so, I mean, that is a very vulnerable position for parents to be in. So just being as comforting as we can be as they're sharing information, and like that's kind of a time when I close my computer and maybe I'm handwriting some notes off to the side, but so I don't have that barrier between me and the parent having those conversations. So when you really do this in practice, not for your assignment, just be mindful of some of those components. The student interview part, when we, in a couple of weeks, get into the Ross Green stuff, there's some really good components for how to do an interview with a student. And that ends up being a piece that we miss a lot. Because you talk about a kid, like, who knows the student and their behavior best? Them. But we put a whole bunch of, I'd say high paid, but we're not, but professionals at a table, right? We put a whole bunch of very well educated individuals all at a table problem solving it, and we leave the one person who knows it the best out of the conversation. So we need to be bringing kids into the conversation and not being afraid to talk to them about it, about, hey, I saw, this is what I noticed happening. Can you tell me more about that? Like, why are we struggling here? Or, hey, like, you keep leaving during third hour. What is going on here? Where, what can we do to help support you to have this go better? And just getting that input from them is probably the most valuable piece. So that's going to go there in your interview section of your FBA report. So that becomes one component of your FBA when we talk about triangulating our data, your interviews. So, and it's not an option to not interview the parent. It's not an option to not interview the teacher, not an option to not interview the student. There are means even for our most struggling population of students in SLC, our teams are interviewing nonverbal students and doing reinforcement inventories and those pieces, and that gets reflected there. Okie dokie? So saying, yeah, they're nonverbal, I couldn't do it. Yeah, you can. So you gotta be creative on it, and you're doing it through different means. So you're doing a reinforcement, like, which do you want? Do you want the chocolate or do you want the egg? Whatever, giving them different options to pick different reinforcement and reflecting it that way. Okay. Student strengths. So even on the IEP, I feel like this is an area that we don't dive into well enough, and we leave it as fluffy things and we don't really dive into it. When we say on the IEP or on an FBA or on a behavior intervention plan, the strengths of that student, that is relative to them as an individual. So for me, as a student who struggles maybe in all content areas, we might say my strength is math. I'm still 3 grade levels below my peers in math, but relative to me and my performance in other areas, math is my strength. So make sure you're thinking about it in those means. Also, make sure, like, this is really meant to dive into them as a person and as a learner, not just like, student strengths. Well, he can run really fast and he has a great smile, and there's all those feel-good ones, right? But really, this needs to be usable information. So when we're talking about, let's say we have a kiddo who we have pulled out of class and they're being taught in a separate setting, and we're looking for opportunities to build back in their schedule, and we want to set them up for success. And we look around and we're like, okay, what part of the day do we start with? We want it to be like their best shining time of the day. Where do we find that information? We should be going to the student's strengths to find that. Oh, it says on here math is a relative strength for them. Let's maybe start with math time and we're gonna build from there. Or the student really enjoys, I don't know, like STEM activities and has a real interest in that area. Reflect that in the student's strengths. So make sure we're digging deep when we talk about those strengths, both in our annual IEP meetings and on this. Sometimes the fluffy things, though, are helpful because when you're looking for what's reinforcing to the student or what might motivate them, sometimes you can go back to that too. And if you know, gosh, they really enjoy, playing kickball at recess, that's great. Like, let's put that on there. Okay. All right. Previous behavior interventions. This is where we have that summary, I talked about before. That's where we're putting that summary of those interventions that you've put in place. Make sure it's data-based in here. You're putting the date that it was implemented, what it was, what our response to that intervention was, and then whether it was continued or discontinued. And if it was discontinued, put the date that it was discontinued on there, okay? Alright.
The date and.
The date, what intervention you put in place, and then whether it was successful or not. So whether you have continued that intervention or whether you discontinued it. And I'll tell you on this, where I start to get concerned is when I see one date and 8 different interventions. How do we know what worked? So you need to be thinking about being systematic in implementing your interventions. So I put intervention A in place. It improved slightly, but not to the point we want it to. So I'm gonna continue that intervention, but I'm gonna add another one now. We still see a little bit more improvement, but not to that point that I want. So I'm gonna keep A and B, and I'm gonna add C. C comes in place and the kid falls off the rails. I'm gonna discontinue C, and now I'm gonna introduce, intervention D. So make sure you're being systematic on those as you make the decisions on interventions and watching your data for how the student responds.
So you discontinue, you put that date on there too, that.
The date that you discontinued it. Yep. And that would be the same thing, guys, on your academic data too. When you are trialing different interventions for kids, whether it's determining what accommodations are needed or what intervention you're using for your instruction, you should be keeping a log of those things along the way. And then also, you don't throw everything at it all at once. You need to be systematic on what you put in place. Alright. And then the same thing goes when you start removing it too. So, gosh, we put all these things in place, we were doing well for a while, and now we're back to what we had previously. So systematically start taking them away too. Don't cut them all and start from scratch.
So how does the RTI team help us?
So that is gonna be, that's what's getting reflected here. So that's everything even that's leading up to the point where you're intervening with the student. And so they should have the data from your SIT team or your RTI team to be reflected in there as well, because they should be part of that problem solving too. Definitely, because you want to be looking at so many things. It's like, well, they've qualified for SPED, so our SPED team's just gonna handle it. But the fact is, especially when we talk about behavior pieces, it's impacting them throughout their day. And if a behavior is happening in the gen ed setting, we need to have other people problem solving with us too, not just a SPED lens on it.
What if they don't give you the data? What happens?
If they don't give you the data,
Yeah, right. Not so, don't give me the data, but just so like, okay, so they met with the student, they did the intervention, and then when I asked for the stuff, the data, the information, it was like, well, he didn't do it, the student never did it, comply. He said he would, but he didn't comply. So then I said, okay, but I still need what you have in place, cause
yeah,
I have to comply with him.
yeah,
To make sure he's doing it and on top of it, right?
right.
So, yeah.
So I think where it comes to the accountability piece, so sometimes it depends on where we're looking for that intervention to be put in place. So in that scenario where he's like, yeah, he didn't comply, I'll be like, hey, let's sit down together, and maybe we sit down with the student and that person and myself. Okay, what went wrong? What happened? What do we need to do different so that this can happen, right? And problem solving it in that way. Because also, we have a lot of times, like, I mean, look to your left, look to your right, there's no one in this district who isn't working off the charts, right? People are stretched and doing their best. And there is a lot going on in gen ed classrooms and in SPED classrooms, top to bottom. So I have a data collection sheet, and I'm asking the gen ed teacher to be tallying something or doing something on it, and they're just not doing it, right? I'm not gonna be just mad like, well, you just didn't do it. I need to go to them and like, okay, talk to me about this. This is information we need to gather. What can we do to make it doable for you? Or giving that understanding and follow up on it. And I feel like that needs to be a first step. If beyond that, if then they still just don't do it, then maybe you talk to your school psych, like, hey, can you help me with this? I know this is information we're needing to gather. What's worked for you on things with them, that problem solving piece. And really when it comes down to it, and we're talking about IEP compliance and evaluation pieces, then it falls to an administrator too. I feel like professionally, we need to give each other the grace to have a conversation first. It's not like I caught you not collecting that data and I reported it to the admin. Like, look out. Because that's not gonna help us moving forward. But I think we go and have the conversations and we try and make the attempts. And if there are legally compliant pieces that are not in place, your administrator needs to know. They're the LEA. Over all IEPs in that building, they have a responsibility that it's in place. And they don't know what they don't know. So if we don't inform them of it, not in a tattletale way, but in a, hey, listen, we're working to get this data collected for this evaluation. Here's what we've tried. We're still struggling with getting the data back that we need. How can you help me? Type way.
And well, also, I started making, I'm tallying my own data, in case I run out of time, you know,
Yeah.
and I do them steps, you know what I'm saying? And they're still not complying with me and helping me, and you know what I'm saying, to get this done correctly, but,
Yeah.
I just went ahead and made me a little, and just tallied it up, and I'm speaking with them every day, so,
Yeah.
about it, and he's complying very well. I just want to-
Yeah. Because we need to make sure what we put in place there too. And you can note, like, we put this in place at this, on this date.
Documentation.
And then, but we're saying we introduced it on this date, but we really didn't have it in place with fidelity until such and such date. Those are good pieces to document on there, because your start date isn't really your start date until it's started. Great thoughts on that. Okay. The next piece is the box for observations. This is a big piece, and it's a time suck, and, but we need to talk kind of about what this needs to look like. So, I don't know about you guys at this point in your careers, but nobody ever really taught me how to do an observation. It has kind of evolved from seeing different pieces and then knowing what information we need to gather. But oftentimes I will sit down in a meeting and they talk about the observation, and it's a narrative of what happened. Like, I sat down in the room at 10:20. The class was doing whole group instruction. The student was seated in the second row in a blue shirt and had on purple shoes for the day. The student did not respond to anything and sat with their head down. The teacher asked the student to lift their head up, and the student did not do that. And then I left the room at 10:40. That gives us nothing to work with. I mean, that is a lovely story, but that doesn't give us data to work from. When you go in to do an observation, you're collecting data. And so you also, along with that data for the target student, how do you know what their performance is compared to peers unless you collect data on the peer? We're looking for a discrepancy between our target student and the rest of the student population, and we find that from our observation data. So when you go in, and I don't know if I have it on here, I don't. I'm gonna get all artsy for you guys. Great. So I set up my data sheet, and I go in, and yes, I mark what time I came in. I mark the gist of what's occurring in the classroom. But the main piece that I do is I look at, and I have on my data sheet, like a grid that looks kind of like this, and it has a bunch of intervals to it. And I leave it blank because I'm gonna use the same form multiple times. So when I come in, and then down at the bottom, I'm gonna have, hey, supervised function as well. So when I go in to do, and I probably have like a bunch of these. And I have an electronic version of this that I'll share with you guys. So when I go in, for almost every single observation that I do, especially when I'm looking at behavior, on-task behavior is probably a given, right? For most any student we're looking at. So up here I might mark on task, and then I'm gonna put Linda, and then I'm just gonna put a P for peer. And then when I'm observing, I wanna know about the student participation. So I'm gonna note on here participation, and I'm gonna have Linda, and I'm gonna have the peer. And then I wanna know about reinforcement. I decide which things just globally I want to look at for Linda and the peer. I know that the target for my FBA is elopement for Linda. So I have my antecedent behavior consequence data, the same as what's kind of ongoing being collected, but I have it on my data sheet too, so we can just watch and make sure we match. So if those big behaviors that we're targeting happen while I'm observing, I have a reliability piece. I'm gonna mark my antecedent behavior consequence data, and the gen ed teacher is gonna mark hers, and then we're gonna come together later and we're gonna look and see, did we report it the same? That's called inter-rater reliability, and that's an important piece, to have more than one person look at the same thing and see if it's being reflected the same way. So I just always have that on my sheet as well. So I come in, I find a spot, I try to be kind of obscure, so maybe they don't know I'm watching them. It's always a good idea to have multiple people do an observation with this exact same template. So you can also have like maybe a para could be trained to do one, your social worker, your school psych, any variety of individuals, right? So I sit down and I start my observation at 10 o'clock. So I'm gonna put a little 10 o'clock here, and I'm gonna look at Linda, and is she on task? Yay, good job, Linda. Is the peer on task? Yes, they are. And I'm gonna determine myself what interval or how often I feel like I need to check on that. Usually, like sitting and just observing every 5 minutes is too small. Like usually every minute to 2 minutes, I'm checking for on-task behavior. So I start doing 10 o'clock, and I do 01, 02, 03, 04, 05, and on here, I'm doing my pluses and minuses across for on-task behavior. End of my observation, I tally these up, and for my 30-minute observation, I can say Linda was on task 73% of the intervals, and my classroom peer was on task 94% of the intervals. Choosing your peer is important. This is not the shining star. Do not pick the best and brightest gifted student who ever walked the planet to be your peer comparison. Like, we're talking your middle of the road kiddo who just as easily could flip the teacher off as get an A on their math paper, right? So the kiddo who's just our average Joe guy or gal, right, is gonna be your peer comparison. Also, you probably don't wanna pick a kid who's identified for SPED that you know of. So you're kind of looking for those variables. So typical classroom peer is your comparison. As I'm doing participation, so I'm gonna collect, and maybe on participation, I'm looking here, and at 10:01, Linda raised her hand. She didn't get called on. At 10:03, my peer raised their hand and they got called on. And then Linda had a talk out, but really it was relevant to the topic. So I'm gonna put a little T on here. She talked out at 10:07. And then she raised her hand again at 10:10, and she did get called on then. So you're gonna just start tracking their participation and what that looked like across. So then at the end, I can say, well, Linda attempted to participate 8 times. She was called on 2 of those 8 times. The peer attempted to participate 5 times, and they were called on all 5 of those times. That is data to reflect in your report. Reinforcement, I start watching, and I'm gonna do, good job, Linda. I like how you raised your hand and asked that question. I really appreciate that. I'm gonna note at 10:10. And peer here is getting told, good job at 10:04. The teacher then says, hey, class, I really like the way you guys are responding. You really seem engaged in this. I'm gonna note up here maybe at 10:06 with a W or however I wanna code it. These codes don't matter as long as I know what they mean. That there was a whole class reinforcement. So you're gonna track along there. So then you can know, hey, within this 30-minute class period, my target student received verbal praise 8 times. She also received a Tootsie Roll and a sticker, or whatever. I can track what it is that student got reinforcement-wise compared to what a peer got. This is what you're putting in your observation data, not the story. I'm gonna say on there, I came in at 10 o'clock, it was math instruction. They were doing whole group work from 10 o'clock to 10:15, and then they had some independent work assignments that were given from 10:15 to 10:30. That's my narrative. And then it's data reflected of what behaviors you looked to observe and what data you have from what you saw. Okay? So with that, you might notice on the form, the wording, it doesn't say observation, it says shins, right? There's an S on the end. I'm not a good language person, but I know that an S on the end means more than one. So, make sure your observations start to track kind of a picture of the student across the day. If you know, from your data that you're collecting ongoing, maybe you already know from 2 to 3 o'clock every day, Linda blows her top. I'm gonna make sure I do an observation between 2 and 3 o'clock, for sure, right? But I'm also gonna make sure, hey, she has never had a single behavior issue from 11:30 to 12:30, because she's really good at lunch and recess. But I'm gonna do an observation during that time. So you're gonna look for the good, the bad, the ugly, and you're gonna work to capture it. So don't feel like you're always looking for the bad areas, because really you get a lot more ideas on what to put in place when you look at where the student is successful. So make sure you're looking at, and also, I'm not always gonna go into the same 3rd hour math class. It's really hard too when your plan time matches to that 3rd hour math class. That's where you have to maybe call on some other people to do observations at different times during the day. A variety of locations, variety of times during the day, content area. If you have 2 teachers who have very different expectations within their classroom, go and see both areas, okay? So that brief summary of the setting, data with the classroom peer, and then observations do not have to be all by the same person, but you need to make sure. So if Carla and I are both gonna do observations, we're gonna talk and say, okay, when we go in, we need to do on task, we need to do reinforcement, we need to do peer interactions. And that's what we're gonna be tracking for. We're gonna make sure we both are tallying the same thing, so we have a good comparison, okay? So that's the observation part. Again, on your all's part, it'd be great if you want to do a practice observation. So I would say, so you have your group of 4, right? Each one of you does one observation of the student that you're targeting for your FBA, and you each can individually write up your observation summary. but you as a team are gonna have to agree on what you're collecting data on for that observation. So that way, when you write your FBA report, it's all comparable.
So we're all observing the same behavior, basically.
Yeah, so on your FBA, you as a team all have the same target behavior.
Right.
You all have a different student, which is a little backwards, but that's okay. So your target student for the FBA, who you're collecting data on, you need to do an observation of.
Okay.
And then your FBA report for your team, so that you have the right number of observations, more than one. You all do one. So, Carly doesn't do 4 observations of the target. You don't say, hey, you're responsible for the observation part of our FBA, you go do it. Everybody in here needs to complete an observation and collecting that data. Yep.
Did you say you already got this form? Great.
That I can send to you guys? Yep. I also have, and I don't wanna overwhelm you guys with a stupid amount of stuff, but I have Google Drives with both like zones of regulation stuff, but also a whole bunch of rating scales, data collection forms, all sorts of stuff. I will share those with you guys, and you are welcome to sort through them, but also feel free to be like, this is too much. But there's different observation forms within there as well too. But there's one that I really like. And I wonder if I can show you. It might be done for today. Oh, here it is. I just have them like this, so I have it already set for on-task behavior. Down here, participation, so I have it by interval, and on there, I'm just tallying. And then, like redirection, so the number of times they received a redirection, I tally it there, reinforcement. So all of those things that are on there, you can change what it is. And so that I have consistency among people, similar to how you write an operational definition of behavior, I put an operational definition of what I'm looking for there. So on task, participating in classroom or lesson activities, looking up toward the speaker and or the materials, and then for each minute interval, mark a plus or minus for the student and peer. So I define those on there, and then have my antecedent behavior pieces on there that I can just click, click, click for collecting it. So I can share that one with you guys. And
Yeah, that would be.
it's in a format where you guys can edit it too, to use for your groups too. This is an idea. You are welcome to run with whatever works for you guys. Do not feel that you are pigeonholed to this. It's just something that I've used, and how I do it to get the data.
When you share that, you want us to make a copy of it first before we.
Yeah. And then you can edit it from there. So I'll send it to you view only, and then if you just hit make a copy, then you can edit from there. All right. This is the meat of it. So that antecedent behavior consequence data that you collect with that hypothesized function piece, remember you're including that element to your data collection, is gonna be summarized here on your FBA document. That's the same one we talked about last time. So, last week in the stuff that I sent you, I talked about using a Google form for collecting the data. Next week when we talk about graphing, we'll kind of go into how to you can create those graphs from a Google form. But then we also will talk about if you're doing by hand just a checkmark version of an antecedent behavior consequence data form, what options you have for compiling it and how to graph. We're gonna also talk about how to put a trend line in, how to put an intervention line into your data. So let's say you have your data across multiple weeks for your FBA, right? And it's kind of, you have your line going there and your trend line is kind of inching up. That means we have some good stuff in place, right? Or It depends on how you're reflecting your data. Maybe you want your trend line to go down because you want a decrease in the behavior. Maybe you're looking at the use of the intervention and so you want it to trend up. So we'll talk about how to add those in, but also you want your data to reflect your changes over time. So we have our, that intervention data that we talked about earlier where you have it dated. You're gonna go into your behavior graph and you're gonna put a line at each date when an intervention was changed. So you're gonna put on September 6th a line and intervention A was put in place. And then you're gonna watch your data, see what your data does. Does it increase or decrease? Then on October 1st, we put intervention B in place. And then we watch for our trend of what our data does. So you're gonna have that over time. Then, you know what happened? On November 2nd, Linda started some medication and parents shared that with us. We're marking that on our data to show, to watch and see what improvements we see based off of that medication change. Physicians really appreciate this information, so do parents. Super helpful for them, not just for us. So making sure we document those pieces of data across time. So you'll want to, on here, what?
Do we even document like, had a student whose parents just stopped giving them medicine, and then 2 months later they started.
So whatever's being shared with you by them, you're not gonna put like, it doesn't look like Linda took her meds today. It's like when you have that information like from the parent, like, oh yeah, we did miss that day. So maybe on your graph you have a star on that day and you code it that the star means parent report of no med given, right? So then you kind of have some explanation to your outlier data that starts to, and the spikes that you start to see. Yep. You're gonna start looking for trends to the time of day that it occurred. So you're gonna have multiple graphs within here. You're gonna have the behavior graphed over time, right? Just whether the behavior is increasing or decreasing. You're gonna have probably like a lovely colorful pie chart or maybe a little line graph that shows location or setting. You're gonna have it for the time of day. You're probably gonna have 5 to 6 different graphs within here, and it depends on how many behaviors you have. Luckily, you guys are just doing one, so that makes it easier. But when you get into FBAs that have 2 to 3 of them, you end up with 12 to 15 different graphs of data there, okay? So you're going to not just plop the graph into here, you also need to provide narrative to it. So underneath each graph, you're gonna put a summary of what that's telling me. It's your synthesis of that information, like from such and such date to such and such date, the overall average occurrences of behavior was such and such per day. You're gonna do some work with the data to look at it in different ways like that, and we'll hit on those next week to kind of talk through different options of how you wanna look at your data. All right? That becomes quite a weighty part of your FBA. We're gonna wrap up here pretty quick, don't you fret. Okay. And then you have the summary of your data here. This part kind of falls in a funky spot. You're gonna put your hypothesis of function later on. Here's where you're going to give like the observation data and the antecedent behavior consequence data, how they align and match, or where you're seeing differences from that is gonna go in your summary of the data. And then, hang on, we also are gonna go up here, sorry, let's do, ooh, where did we? Let's put, I'm just thinking about the rating scales piece. Okay, so in that behavior link, there are some different tools that you can use. For your guys' practice, the best option for you to do is a rating tool that's called a QABF. And it's linked on that Resources for Shawnee Mission. This is a rating scale that you're gonna give to, I would give it to 2 different people. I would give it like to a gen ed teacher and yourself complete it, or the parent complete it and you complete it. for sake of your project, each person on your team is going to complete it, nobody outside of that. So you would have 4 to 5 of these completed. You are going to take, and you're gonna look at the behavior that you have targeted, and there is, if your target behavior is elopement or Linda, I'm gonna think about all these different scenarios, and I'm gonna mark whether never, rarely, some, or often. And I'm gonna go through here and answer these questions saying 0, 1, 2, or 3. Do I engage in the behavior to get attention? 0. Do I engage in the behavior to escape work and learning situations? 3. So you're gonna go through for the student that you're working with, and you need to fill out one of these rating scales for that target behavior that you're looking at. If you were doing this in practice and you had 2 behaviors, you would fill this out twice, one for each behavior that you're evaluating. So then, and it's pretty self-explanatory, what you're gonna do when you go to complete this is down at the bottom, you're gonna find question number 1 at the top, and did you give it a 0? So you mark a 0 in the box, or whatever number it is. So for each of those down at the bottom, you put the number that's associated with that question. You add up each of those columns. The one with the highest number is the winner. So if it comes out though, and you as a team on your observation data and your antecedent behavior consequence data are maybe feeling like it's escape, avoid, but this comes out and it says attention seeking as a 14, but escape, avoid is a 13. That's a pretty close correlation. You can't discredit escape from being a possible function. So you would be okay moving forward with your data as is. So on your eval report, and on this, I would reflect this in your interview section of your FBA report. So you're gonna say, so one of you pretend like you're the, or no, let's not put it there. Let's put it, and that's gonna get messy for you guys to look at. I would do it under, let's do it on the summary of data. So that final box before recommendations, put your QABF results in there. And for the sake of this, I want everybody to do the QABF. Are we good on that? We're not gonna mess with a whole bunch of different ones. Put your summary of your data in there. So you're gonna pretend like, name one of you as a parent, one of you as a gen ed teacher, a sped teacher, another gen ed teacher, maybe you have mom and dad, or aunt and mom, or whoever it is. Give yourself each a role. And you're gonna reflect that, the results from the QABF there. Okay. And with that, then afterwards, in that summary of data, your last statement on there is gonna be based on the data from observations, data collected, and rating scales completed by team members. It is the hypothesized function of Linda's escape behavior that it is maintained by attention or escape avoid of academic tasks, or whatever you guys determine to be the function of the behavior. That statement is gonna go there in your summary of data as the final statement within there. And then the last piece on that FBA report is your recommendations. So on there, you go back to your interventions that you put in place, and you're gonna list on here what interventions you recommend continuing with, because the data supports that the kid is making good progress with that. Do you recommend a behavior intervention plan be developed by the team? You're gonna say yes, that you do. So those statements for recommendations for the student moving forward. And also if you identified any specific skills that need to be taught, like teaching of a skill for Linda to use a break pass to replace her escape behavior or elopement behavior would be recommended. So those pieces go in that final box of what you as a professional feel like you would recommend to the evaluation team as a next step. Questions? I am also going to send you, because when you do an evaluation, you do a QABF, you need to include in there an explanation of what a QABF is. I'm gonna send you a sample of a write-up from an FBA of how the QABF data gets reflected on the report.
Yes.
Where do we find the QABF in?
It is, if you go to the link from last week's stuff, that behavior resources document, and you scroll down to the FBA parts, it is questions about behavior functioning, and it's linked right on there for you. Questions that you guys have? Thoughts? I would also recommend as a team, when you're doing your data, when you do that student interview part, I would include a reinforcement inventory summary in there. So I would do some sort of reinforcement inventory for you guys for this project. You're gonna be making that information up. Or one of you from your team can do an actual reinforcement inventory. And there's a couple different ones listed on here with your student, and you can just reflect it from one of them. That was a lot of information for the record. Huh?
Said I pretty much typed out everything except verbatim, if anyone wants it.
I recorded you.
I don't want it. I do not, and
I
so
typed it for Tom.
I don't want to read over it and be like,
Everyone wants it.
wow, I sounded like an idiot. But then these slides are there for you guys too to go back and reference for those different components. So that covers all of the areas of the FBA that you guys need to do. Your main parts, collecting your data and kind of wrapping that up in the next week or so probably, because you want to then start compiling it and having time to work with it. Everybody does a QABF. Everybody does an observation, so you need to be getting those pieces done. And as a group, you guys need to figure out what your data collection for your observation is gonna look like, so team members can start getting those pieces done.
Did you already send us this one?
No, but I will, right now.
Thank you.
All right.
So in our lesson plan, it should be the remainder of the activity should be the intervention, right?
It might be, it's the teaching piece.
Okay.
So think about that teaching piece.
Is it okay if we look at the books now, or do you have
Oh,
more?
yeah, go.